Yes, you are.
Senator, thank you so much. We could literally go off on this for hours and hours and hours, but I think that we got it pegged. There is no reason to bring Somali populations to your state unless, of course, you want to commit voter fraud and have a block of a population that is virtually untraceable be able to register fake voters in mass and at scale, and no one be able to actually have any accountability. And then that guarantees political power for one party. Do we have that pegged, or what do you think, Senator?
Well, I think so. I think the biggest concern is this is literally just the tip of the iceberg. Whether you're talking about the voter fraud that was exposed there, or you talk about the massive welfare fraud, it's just the tip of the iceberg. It's not just the Somali population. This is across the board. And this has been Democrats' game plan. I mean, flood the country with immigrants from all over the world, set up these welfare programs, don't check eligibility, and make people dependent on government. And from their standpoint, it's worked beautifully. And we're just scratching the surface here. That's my concern is when you hear, well, 500 illegal, but just illegal registration didn't impact the vote. Are you kidding me? There's massive fraud. I mean, I'm listening to apparently a former CIA operative talking about how they shave votes, not in Democrat counties. They'll shave a few percent using the machines in Republican counties where people aren't really suspecting it, where the vote total should have been 60%, but it's only 58%. Again, I don't know how they do it exactly, but I do know that we don't even come close to investigate voter fraud or welfare fraud. We don't put anywhere near the amount of effort that we should be putting into this.
Well, Senator, you just broke some huge news there. You're listening to do you have a CIA whistleblower that is saying that they're...
and again, is this true? Again, you hear all these things. This is on a podcast, some apparently CIA operative who's, let's face it, I believe the CIA has doctored elections in other countries. That's probably indisputable.
Yes.
Those same types of operations, do those occur here in America? My guess is they do. Do I have hard evidence? No. But again, we just don't investigate it. The people, we're all harmed by it, but for example, the losing candidate, they don't have the funds. We don't have the time yet to certify these elections. So election fraud goes largely uninvestigated. We uncover, again, in your earlier segment, 500 phony registrations. It's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, you have the Secretary of State there, straight-faced, saying that doesn't mean they voted. Right? It's like, well, what do you think the voter registration is for? How do you get away with that? I mean, like, at what point, and we did this during the Bud Light boycott, frankly, and the same rules apply. At what point don't you just sit and target Minnesota and use Minnesota as an example and take Minnesota and just say, you know what? Yeah, we can't cover all the fraud in all 50 states. We know there's fraud in all 50 states. We can track all the fraud in all 50 states. We can see the filings, but let's just use Minnesota and make them an example and show the American public that they can rig elections, that they are rigging elections. They're doing so with criminal alien communities or with imported communities like the Somalis that have obviously no principles, no mooring, no allegiance to America, except for using it as a piggy bank for funding Muslim terrorism. Like, why not just... It seems like they're doing that. It seems like the House is now doing that. There are 4 different organs of the Trump administration that are now investigating. Will we see a Senate investigation?
Yes. But again, I think you're right. The strategy should be to fully expose, one instance where we see massive welfare fraud. Once we have all that exposed, understand, okay, here's their game plan. I mean, this is how they do it. Then you start looking countrywide and try and uncover the rest of those schemes. So I think it's perfectly legitimate. One of my concerns is how much money we flow into, for example, non-government organizations that then filter that money down to eventually probably these vans that show up at these peaceful protests with riot gear, or fund all these legal organizations. People like Mark Elias and other folks that are engaged in the lawfare against ordinary Americans. 38 Wisconsinites who just, some of them were the alternate electors. They tried to destroy their lives through these legal foundations and these legal firms. Again, where do they get the money from? A lot of it comes from American taxpayer funneled through non-government organizations. So again, this is massive. That's what I'm saying. This is just the tip of the iceberg of what the radical left is doing that's literally destroying this country.
Yeah, I mean, it is completely. I go back to the voting and the voter fraud because there is no other explanation for bringing in 100,000 Somalis into Minneapolis. I mean, quite frankly, if you wanted to do something nice for them, like at the very least, put them in a climate that reflects Somalia, right? Like put them in a desert somewhere that like is more reflective of where they're from. Like, but now, now you're starting to sort of like see the full game plan here, and it's so in your face. It's just so blatant that it's impossible to ignore.
And that's 100,000 Somalis approximately. What about the millions coming in through the Biden administration, knowing full well that our census counts non-citizens in the census count, which plumps up their numbers of members of Congress, plumps up the amount of federal funding they get for their welfare programs where they don't check eligibility. Yeah. So, I mean, I've seen reports, $150 to $160 billion per year just supporting all forms of government funds to support the illegal immigration population that's coming under Biden. This is massive. Then don't even then add to that the massive fraud we're showing. I saw one report about $1.7 million of remittances from the Somali diaspora going into Somalia, which is more than the entire federal budget of Somalia. $1.7 billion. Now, a fair amount of that comes from the United States. Where's it coming from? Probably the federal government and state governments as well. So no, this is just the tip of the iceberg. That's the most important point to make here. Yeah, target this, fully expose it, but open up your aperture though and realize, no, this is happening across the board, primarily in large Democrat-run states and municipalities and cities. This is basically done in Democrat strongholds because the Democrat Party has become radicalized and they have declared war on their political opposition. We need to wake up to that fact. This is a war declared by the radical Democrats.
Yeah, we have a election map here of fraud, excuse me, from the Heritage Foundation that shows Minnesota effectively being like the fraud central of the United States. These are just active cases of election fraud. There's active cases in every state, but in Minnesota, there are hundreds, thousands actually, of active election fraud cases. It's a state that is clearly being run as a criminal enterprise. A lot of very shady, very dark things going on there. It just seems like a great opportunity for Republicans to isolate a target and then to dig in and to expose it for the American people. And I think it wins from a messaging standpoint, Senator, because there's not a lot of Americans that can really justify like having 100,000 Somalis that are not assimilating to our culture, that refuse to speak English, that have their own laws, that have their own churches, that have their own pretty much separate institutions that are set up, countervailing American culture entirely, and they're proud of it. I think the vast majority of Americans are disgusted by that, frankly.
And even though we are a nation of immigrants, and it has helped build this country, the problem in the last few decades is the immigrants coming in here have refused to assimilate. They haven't accepted our Constitution. They want to, for example, the Somalis, they want Sharia law.
Yes.
So that's a real problem. So and we can expose the voter fraud, but you actually need to enact controls to prevent it from happening. We're moving the exact opposite direction. Democrats want mail-in balloting. We expand the use of absentee voting, even though the Baker-Carter bipartisan commission said that was probably the greatest area of risk of voter fraud was absentee ballot. We doubled it in the 2020 election. So we're moving the wrong direction. This is one of the reasons I support President Trump's call to end the filibuster to get control over election law. I don't want federal control over election law, but there are basic controls that we probably need to enact nationally. And it's limiting voting time. It's limiting the again, absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, all these types of things that we know fraud is committed. Our State Department goes to other countries and we give advice on how to prevent fraud, and we don't follow our own advice in our own country.
So will Republicans end the filibuster? I mean, I'm seeing actually this, it seemed kind of crazy when it was first proposed, just because I've been following the ping pong ball back and forth on this issue. But when you actually look at the logic of it, it makes an enormous amount of sense, because you can see precisely what the left has planned. Eric Holder in a speech just last night talked about how they will be adding 12 seats to the Supreme Court to ensure that there is a far left-wing progressive court forever in America. And where the hell is that going to, when is that ever going to stop? Is there a stomach in there? Is there a stomach in the Republican caucus in the Senate to actually do this?
Well, first of all, it's always Democrats that have broken precedent, that destroy the norms and take us down the slippery slope. But once that started, that really started with Harry Reid here in the Senate in terms of 60 votes. You have to recognize reality. They purged the two members, Sinema and Manchin, who held the line and didn't allow them to end the filibuster back when they had the chance to do it. Now every Senate Democrat has voted to do it. The people are here. And the ones that ran for office and any future candidates, I'm sure, are going to vow to eliminate the filibuster. So, again, believe what they say. Understand they mean what they say. And we better preemptively act. If not, we're going to really be in trouble. So, there was a real reluctance for us to change the rules to get President Trump's nominees through, but the Democrats were so obnoxious and so obstructionist that every Republican voted to change the rules so he could at least staff his administration. I think the best chance we have for eliminating the filibuster is just watch Democrats. 42-day shutdown, completely unnecessary, harmed a lot of people. They don't care who they hurt and destroy. Watch the Democrats perform over the next couple of months. They will do nothing to help the American public. Again, they're not actually interested in fixing the failed Obamacare. They just want to use this as a political weapon. So watch the Democrats obstruct any kind of good legislation to help our economy, help the American public. Hopefully enough of my Republican colleagues will recognize the reality that they're going to do everything they can to make sure that Donald Trump and Republicans have no success between now and the election, because all they want is they want a failed economy so they win the election. It's all about power for them. Yes. Maybe enough of my colleagues will awaken to that fact and act before they do, so that we can actually preserve this economy, so we can secure our elections, fully secure our border, have a prosperous economy, fix Obamacare, transition to a system that actually works. But again, that'll require strong presidential leadership. It target exactly the things we would pass with 51 votes. A lot of planning has to go into this, but again, it's not going to happen overnight. There's a great deal of resistance, but I think it's possible.